Since the times of Bloodborne, after Bloodborne came out, before Dark Souls 3 came out, people were in a fervor, and they were asking the questions. They said, do you think there will be trick weapons in Dark Souls 3? And we were all there. And we were all hoping that there would be some trick weapons in Dark Souls 3. And there weren't. The DLC kinda gave us some kind of like trick weapons, but the way they balanced them, because in a game where you have things that aren't trick weapons, and then you have things that are trick weapons, the trick weapons would be absolutely absurd. So to sort of balance them, in order to do the transformation of the weapon, you had to give up your stamina regeneration. So like the Ring Knight Straight Sword and the Aquamarine Dagger, for example. While those were transformed, you lost your stamina regeneration. Until you let go of that button that was transforming the weapon. Also, you had to hold the weapon transformation button, as opposed to Bloodborne, where that was just a button that transformed the weapon. And typically that transformation would have either an attack attached to it, or an attack that you could input onto it. Point is, no, not really trick weapons in Dark Souls 3. And so then Elden Ring came out. And as we were waiting for Elden Ring to come out, people were asking, do you think there will be trick weapons in Elden Ring? And at this point, I think I had kind of accepted that I didn't think that there would be. And there aren't. But that doesn't mean we can't make our own. Kind of. You know? Like the Dollar Tree version of a trick weapon. I'm that guy, Saint Riot. I make builds in Elden Ring, and then I invade people with the builds that I made. That's like my whole deal. And for whatever reason, I got it in my head that I was going to make this soft swap monstrosity. Soft swapping is when you have two weapons in your right hand slot or your left hand slot, and you just swap between one to the other. That's a soft swap. A hard swap is when you do the same thing, but you only have one weapon equipped, and then you swap it out by opening the menu and selecting a different weapon. So I've got my wish version of the Kirk hammer here, the Giant Crusher, and it's, you know, that's like the transformed version of the weapon. And then I've got the Lordsworn Straight Sword as, you know, the sword part of the Kirk hammer. And you might be asking yourself, why are you using a shield? And it's because you cowards won't give me a gun. But also, you know, you can have a shield in Bloodborne, and it's actually pretty good in PvP. Most people don't know that. Why would they? I guess. But, yeah. Look, I need to be able to parry stuff. That's why I have a shield. That's the long and short of it. John Bloodborne came to the Lands Between. He figured out how to use the shield. That's my lore. That's the lore of my character. This build is a lot of fun, and these invasions that you're seeing here in this video, these are still in the early days of making this build. And so right now, all I have is a sword and a Giant Crusher and my shield here, which is meant to be like the lock shield from Bloodborne. It's like the closest looking thing I could think of. I guess you could also use the rickety shield to be like the plank shield from Bloodborne. I don't know if there's a better plankety wood shield that you could use. I've got one of these invasions where my opponents don't have a lot of health and they don't do a lot of damage. And so they are, you know, they don't know what they're supposed to do. right? But they don't want to get too close to the hammer because it keeps almost killing them in one hit. It's so confusing to see a clip like this. Because you're looking at these characters and it's like everything has gone wrong here, right? They're giving me the time to swap to the Dex Talisman, which allows me to wield the cannon with the correct stats. And so now it will actually do damage. Most of the time, you know, if I was in a pinch, I would just not bother equipping that talisman. The Dex Talisman, the Prosthesis Wearer's Heirloom. I just wouldn't bother. But since these guys are so passive, it gives me time to do this. This is a confusing thing. Because it's like, how did your builds end up this bad? What have we done? Right? And the answer is probably, you know, this might be their first From Software game, and they just don't know how to do a build. And so rather than focus on anything, they have just put points into everything so that they can use everything that they find. Unfortunately, they don't have health and they don't have a lot of damage. The homie using blood tags. I see this a lot in like YouTube videos where people talk about, like, they're like, oh, get this Ash of War, it's underrated, and then in the YouTube video they just spam it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, like this guy's doing. So I think he's like, okay, this gives me health back and it hits a lot, and it's possible that it'll bleed out my opponent. And so like this is kind of like this is the only thing he feels like he has. Which brings us back to, you know, why did you do this, right? You gave yourself all of these options, and none of them are good, right? It doesn't matter. There's nothing more satisfying than landing that big attack and just absolutely pancaking somebody. It's the best. The Kirkhammer in Bloodborne had an attack that was a little similar. If you fully charged the heavy attack, you would, like, pound a guy into the ground like a steak, you know, with your big hammer. And that attack rules. However, if you had enough stamina, you could press heavy attack again after that attack. And if you did that, you didn't have to charge it, but you would do this massive, like, baseball bat swing. And it would send people flying, and it did a ton of damage. And it was hilarious, and I loved that attack. So in Bloodborne, it's kind of, you've got the flip attack on the Giant Crusher. It looks a lot like the Lion's Claw attack, but it's not. It doesn't have that hyper armor either. It has some hyper armor, but it doesn't have that Lion's Claw hyper armor, where you can just, like, ignore everything and just flip. But yeah, if you do that attack, you then get access to another heavy attack afterwards, and you can charge that one. You can charge either, you can charge both. In Bloodborne, you had to charge the first to get the second. In Elden Ring, they have improved on that a little bit. You no longer have to charge the first to get the second. You can just do a regular heavy attack and then do a fully charged second attack, which is what you're going to see me do most of the time. Because it takes a lot of stamina to do those attacks. And it's interesting that this build has this much stamina, because in Bloodborne, you know, you can play the whole game with like 10 endurance and never feel like you need more. You can do PvP. A lot of people's like dump stat in Bloodborne PvP was endurance. Just never level it up. Because you regain stamina so fast, and most attacks don't take much stamina to do. But in Elden Ring, to sort of give you that same experience, now you need endurance. So this build has more endurance at level 93. It's got 22 endurance or something like that, which is more endurance than I put on a lot of builds in Elden Ring. And one of my talismans is the Great Jar Seal Arsenal. the carry weight is very important because this hammer is heavy as hell. And having the hammer and the sword and a shield, like, that adds up, you know? So I need endurance. Thankfully, Bloodborne armor is mostly just like trench coats and really light cloth stuff, so I can manage to look pretty Bloodborne-y without having to, you know, wear 30 pounds worth of armor. And that's nice. It is funny to me that in order to recreate this playstyle that didn't require a lot of endurance, that I have to have a healthy amount of endurance, as well as one of my talismans just goes to being extra equip load. Like, that's how important endurance is to this build. But at level 93, we've managed to get 55 strength, and then the Star Scourge Talisman is bringing us up to 60. And, you know, typically at level 90, I don't think I would make a build that had 60 strength, because I would think that the returns would just not justify that. But when you're using the Giant Crusher, and later on, when I add the Brick Hammer to the build, you will see that, like, it's a lot of damage. The Brick Hammer gets an S scaling in strength at, like, plus 17 upgrade, which is where we're at. So we're at plus 17 weapons, and we're already getting the massive returns on strength investment. And because this build is so weird, we have strength invested. So it works out pretty well for us. This is one of those invasions where I knew they would be waiting for me at the top of the elevator with Mohg's Trident, ready to blast that Ash of War as I came up. Thankfully, like, the one good spawn location in Carrion Manor, I managed to actually get. It's not uncommon to get it in this situation, where they're standing right at the elevator and you use the Phantom Finger. It's not uncommon to get this spawn point, or the one right next to it, which is good. But it sucks that anywhere else the spawn points here are absolutely terrible. But we at least got a little blessing from the other thing this time, the Phantom Finger. I was trying to interrupt the Dragon Breath there, hoping that I could get to him fast enough, and I could not, which is a shame. But I didn't end up eating a whole lot of that Rot Breath, so that was nice. The plan wasn't terrible. I got saved by, like, the wall. But this Phantom that we're fighting here, if you've ever done any invasions, you know, this is a password summoned Phantom, right? And you'll know that these password summoned Phantoms, they can be hard to kill. It just feels like you can't do any damage to them. And I will say that on this build, at least, it does feel like I'm able to do real damage to this guy. It's still not great. If I was his level, it would probably take me like 3 hits to kill him. But because he's so high above my level, you know, I'm going to have to play really, really well for an extended period of time in order to beat this dude. But thankfully, most players that play at that level range aren't real clever, you know? They get through the entire game with just stats, you know? But in terms of, like, actually understanding how the game operates and works, you know, most of them don't know that stuff. To be fair, understanding stats and things like that, that's its own type of knowledge, I guess. But, yeah. I was pleasantly surprised that this build was able to deal with that with relative ease, which was nice. I'm showing off the weapons that I have on the build now, I know you didn't see a lot of these for the actual invasions in this video, but you will see them soon. Real soon. But, yeah, there's a look at the build. I started off hero, which is why I'm keeping my dexterity, like, super low on this build, which kind of limits my weapon choices, but that's fine. I'm cool with that. These are the weapons I wanted to use anyway. So, you know, no dex for this guy. But, I should be okay. The straight sword is pretty decent, heavy infused, and those hammers do real damage, as we just saw, which is nice. It's just a matter of actually hitting people with them. Hope you enjoyed the invasions. I'll see you real soon. Till next time, later y'all.